Good morning, wrestling fans. Today is Friday, February 10th, 2023. Lance Brock once again for this Friday morning to start off some pro wrestling chat. Tonight we have WWE Friday Night SmackDown and AEW Rampage. First, I just want to start off by saying I finally did 360 Wrestling Fanatic episode 360 and talked about this past Wednesday's AEW Dynamite and last night's episode of Impact Wrestling, a little bit of news, and talked about the kind of story of 360 Wrestling Podcast, I guess you could say, when I first started it and when I first decided to start doing a podcast. Also, I made an announcement about the new 360 Wrestling Podcast Premium subscription available on anchor.fm/360-wrestling-podcast 360. I'll put that in the description. Only $4.99 a month. There'll be bonus exclusive shows there. So ad-free, by the way. So hopefully that will work out well. Help support 360 Wrestling Podcast. Anchor.fm/360-wrestling-podcast 360. Like I said, I'll put that in the description. Probably will be episodes of Fanatic Unleashed and maybe a Watch With Me, or maybe some other bonus things I can think of to put on there. So hopefully we can get some supporters there over at Anchor. And today I don't know too much to talk about, so I just want to talk about one of my favorite all-time wrestlers. Sting has been one of my favorites probably about my whole life, as long as I have been watching pro wrestling. I remember when I was real young, very early on, first seeing Sting for the first time. It was probably around the time of that famous Clash of Champions match with Ric Flair, where they went to the time limit draw, and then there was a judge's decision. One of the classic matches in pro wrestling history. If for some reason some of the younger fans that may be listening haven't seen that match, go check it out. I think they still have all the Clash of Champions available on YouTube, and you can go check that out. Or also, the match might be available on YouTube. I wouldn't be surprised. Not for sure if it is or not, but you can look for that. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. And I think the first thing that draws me to Sting, to start liking this guy, was probably his look. He had the beach bong, spiked hair, the face paint. And then I started watching his matches, and then his style, fast-paced, and everything was probably That's probably when he became definitely one of my favorite wrestlers. I was also a Hulkamaniac at the time, and maybe Hogan was more well known than Sting at the time, but I'd say I probably did like Sting more than Hogan at that time. And then, of course, would go on one of my favorite matches of all time at the Great American Bash, him and Ric Flair. I remember one time when I was a kid, went to some kind of like street fair or something like that. They had face paint and they had Sting, and I remember that I got my face painted like Sting, and when I got home later, I didn't even want to wash it off. And I talked about a few days or so ago here on GMWF some pro wrestling action figures. I had the Sting Galoob figure and the regular action figure, and also the Bendham one from a Galoob. And another episode of GMWF that I did the other day talking about wrestling video games. When I played the WCW one, I talked about that on Nintendo, the old World Championship Wrestling game. Most of the time when I played it, probably 95% of the time, I was Sting. When I played it, I'm going to say I was real great at it, but the more I played it, I did get a little better. And of course, just watching on TV, Sting, his feuds with Ric Flair, and I remember Vader, he had a feud with, which for some of the matches they had were pretty good. The strap match they had was good, and there was one though, a tag team match, the White Castle of Fear, which was not very good and is remembered in wrestling history, but not for really good reasons though. But other than that, Sting was and is still one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. And then when 95 or 94 came, I should say, when Hulk Hogan first came to WCW, I thought that was great. Sting and Hogan in the same company at the time. And then in 96 is when he changed everything up, went to the black and white, known as the Crow Sting. I've heard him say in interviews before that he talked about how when Hogan was still with the red and yellow, Hulkamania Running Wild, towards the end of that anyway, Hogan started to get a little bit of booze from the live crowds, and he didn't really want that to happen to him, or he didn't want people to get tired of the Sting character. So he decided to kind of change it up a little bit, and then went to the black and white when the whole NWO thing was started, and they had the fake NWO Sting, which where everybody thought he betrayed WCW. So then he went away for a while, went up in the rafters, and then came back, started having the baseball bat, and eventually he would join the NWO Wolfpack, had the black and red Sting face paint. And then after WCW, that match on the final Monday Nitro with Ric Flair, which wasn't one of their classics, but after that he would go on to he made appearances for World Wrestling All-Stars, TNA on the early Wednesday night pay-per-views, would make appearances, but then he didn't come back full-time to pro wrestling until 2006 at TNA Final Resolution, when he teamed with Christian Cage to take on Jeff Jarrett and Monty Brown. And I remember just personally in 2009 for Slammiversary here at the Palace of Auburn Hills. First time I got to see Sting live in a while since WCW. He had what I thought was actually a pretty good match with Matt Morgan. I know that's not one that really gets talked about a whole lot these days, but I thought those two worked a pretty good match together and would go into the main event Mafia, and then eventually he would leave TNA and then finally go to WWE, which did not turn out too great. And now Sting in AEW made that big debut at Winter is Coming, which was a big surprise at the time, and got to see Sting for a few seconds at Blood and Guts. He didn't do much. Darby Allin was in the Royal Rampage, and he came out real quick with Darby Allin, but then he went to the back, let Darby Allin do it on his own. So that's all for this episode of Good Morning Wrestling Fans. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hopefully we'll have new episodes of 360 Wrestling Fanatic coming soon. Stay tuned on Spreaker or wherever else you listen to 360 Wrestling podcasts. And we'll be back here tomorrow morning for the Saturday episode of Good Morning Wrestling Fans. And remember everyone, hope everyone has a great Friday. Enjoy SmackDown and Rampage tonight. And keep watching pro wrestling.